What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this week's episode of the Mast Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I am a territory manager covering the state of Kentucky, southern Indiana, and southern Ohio. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Joining me today is one of the vice presidents of Orenda / HAASA, Eric Knight. Eric, how's it going, man? Welcome in.
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I definitely wanted to, we've talked a lot on this show already about, building pools and servicing and retail. But for the water chemistry episode, I'm thinking to myself, what better way to talk water chemistry than with Eric Knight? Eric is a part of Orenda's podcast. Orenda is a specialty chemical manufacturer that empowers people to create the best water quality possible with the fewest chemicals involved. Orenda has had great podcasts for some time. One thing at Mast is we wanted to steal all of Orenda's listeners and bring them to us. I'm just playing. But wanted to
all
to just
seven of them. That's good luck, man.
wanted to just get into water chemistry because I feel like we've seen this movement across the pool industry, this like ecological movement to where people are becoming more of aware of our surroundings, and that's sort of the world as it is, right? Everything's becoming more eco-friendly to the variable speed side of pumps, but we're starting to see, Eric, with water chemistry, people across this industry are caring more about what they're putting into their pools. Is that sort of, on the manufacturer side, is that sort of a movement that you picked up on as well?
Certainly with homeowners. I think pool pros are coming along that thinking as well, but homeowners for sure. I think pool pros take a lot longer to change habits that are already established. It's much easier to have somebody who's looking to change because they are directly and personally connected to the outcome. So a mom, for instance, is going to think twice before she puts something in her pool if she's a DIY homeowner because her kids are in it or her grandkids are in it. Everybody thinks differently when their own loved ones are on the line, whereas pool pros are somewhat removed from the outcome unless there's a problem. So, yeah, I think from a chemical standpoint, we are starting to see that, and it's driven by the homeowner.
I think it's pretty interesting because like, when you talk about, installing fiberglass pools, you talk about opening and closing pools. Like, yeah, there's a couple different ways to do it, but you have a lot of the same aspects. With water chemistry, it really depends on who you ask. There's more than one way to skin a cat, as the saying goes. Eric, when you look at all the different ways, and this isn't really an advocating for one way over the other, is there a common theme or like a cardinal rule that you want to follow when it comes to treating water properly?
That's a man. That's a loaded question, Dalton. Been doing this a long time, and I guess I shouldn't say that long of a time, about 8 years. But
Mhm.
the thing about those 8 years is our experience is nothing but troubleshooting. Nobody ever sends us their good pools. When people call Orenda, they're calling us because they don't know how to fix the problem. And so, what I'm saying is, my experience is very concentrated on dealing with bad pool problems. And so, um, when it comes to like a best way to do it, yeah, there are many ways to do it, but honestly, I would categorize them in two camps. There's the traditional way, which is based on textbooks and range chemistry and everything that the industry has been taught for so long.
Mhm.
Maybe so there's some nuances to how that's executed, but generally that's the philosophy. And we teach something fundamentally different to that. It's not that we don't prioritize disinfection. We do. I was a competitive swimmer. I absolutely care about the health and welfare of swimmers. That's the number one priority. Keep water safe, clean, and clear. But you also have to keep it balanced. And I would think that, at least in my experience, where pool pros and homeowners go wrong is they're trying to beat water into submission instead of listening to what water actually wants. Because if you can treat water, like give it what it needs, what's best for water, then you can disinfect it no problem. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive. But I'll give you an example of the problem. Traditional pool care states you have to have your pH between 7.2 and 7.8. You have to. Why? Chlorine disinfection, um, the bather comfort, like the pH of your eyes, and then protecting pool equipment. But that goes out the window if you have cyanuric acid in your water. And that science is known. The charts are there. The CDC's published them. I mean, this stuff has been around, and yet people just don't want to acknowledge it. So the pH doesn't really control the strength of chlorine if you have cyanuric acid in the pool. And if you don't, of course it does. So that's why you need chemical automation on an indoor pool. if the priority is to stay safe, disinfection as it should be, we should really be focusing on how can we do that on a 7-day basis for the pro? Because, they show up every Tuesday, for instance. How are you supposed to get chlorine to hold for 7 days? The pH doesn't stay still for a minute, let alone 7 days. So what we teach is very different. The better way to do it is to use physics. And you have to first understand the physics at play, because water is not dictated by mankind. Water never read the textbook. Water doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about me. It doesn't care about your listeners. Water only cares about equilibrium. So water's been governed by these laws of physics that predate the dinosaurs, and they're not going away. They're just as guaranteed as gravity. That's what we teach. We teach you what water is actually going to do based on natural laws. And when you know that, then you can just align yourself with that so that you can keep the pool disinfected, clean, and clear, all that. And that's really the fundamental difference. One is forcing water into an unnatural position, and the other is using physics to keep the water in a natural position so that we can then disinfect. And it's a lot more effective.
Take me a little bit down that road. So, I mean, it's interesting that you kind of categorize it this way. I'm intrigued to hear, like, what's one example of, the way that you teach it, how it, like, let's say, like, one of the main common problems that come to you. Say you're a troubleshooter. What's one of the main problems that come to you, and what's sort of the non-traditional way to explain how to correct it?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Take your pick. Calcium flakes, not holding chlorine for 7 days, or scale.
We'll go with not holding chlorine. Let's do that
Okay.
one.
So there's a few things that cause this. There's really primarily two things. And the first thing is a loss of chlorine or using up chlorine too fast. And so there is a difference between using chlorine and losing chlorine.
Hmm.
Losing chlorine is wasting it because sunlight breaks it down. Using it is, well, using it up. And as the temperature increases, the reaction rates increase, and therefore chlorine is going to be more effective. It's going to kill faster, and that's a good thing. So we want chlorine to get used, but we don't want to lose much. And that's where cyanuric acid comes into play. But what's not being factored in is the water temperature. For instance, there's no water temperature standard. So if that's not applied to the range chemistry standards, you're missing out a big piece of this puzzle, because for every 10 degrees Celsius, and this is approximate, reaction rates double in water. So if you're at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, I guess I'll just say degrees. If you go from 65 to 75, your reaction rates approximately double. 75 to 85, they double again. That's a
Hmm.
huge difference. And so
It
most of
is.
your year, especially where you live, it's really cold, man. I woke up this morning, it was 26 degrees Fahrenheit in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm in the deep South. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. So I mean, it's
It's
right on
cold.
that weird line of the Ohio River kind of messes with it. But you're right in that
Hmm.
regard. Yeah, it's pretty, kind of hit or miss. I wonder, Eric, when you kind of look at this from you got business owners listening to this show, and the
Hmm.
you know the point of this show is that you can listen to this, and if you can take one piece of information that you find useful and to help apply it to your business, then I feel like it's a successful episode. So if you're a business owner and you're listening to this, and maybe let's say you either run a retail shop or you're a builder that also tries to help in that transition. um it seems like water chemistry gets overlooked a lot, and
Oh, yeah.
with us talking, it should be one of the main things at the forefront of discussion, no?
Well, of course, because water is the lifeblood of the industry. I mean, what is the one common substance that we all treat, whether you have a vinyl liner, fiberglass, above ground, in ground, concrete, hot tub?
Yeah.
It's all water. And water is super predictable. And when it's predictable, it's controllable. I shouldn't say controllable. When it's predictable, it's profitable. Physics can control it, but you and I cannot. Predictable water is profitable water. But when we introduce complexity because we're, careless with our chemicals, or we're overdosing, we're not measuring, we're overdosing acid, for instance, or we're overchlorinating, or we're adding algicides, and that conflicts with chlorine. All of this is self-inflicted harm that we're doing to our own water, which costs us money, and it costs a bad time for the customer. But I want to get back to something you said, because I realized I got derailed there in my own head, not your fault. You asked me the two main things of not holding chlorine for a week. The first one is we have to know the consumption or the loss rate. But the second
Hmm.
one has to do with physics. And that has to do with a concept called the pH ceiling. Now, we coined it that. I think it's actually the pH equilibrium coefficient. There's some constant here. It's a Henry's law constant. If you
Okay.
want to get into the thermodynamics of it, listeners, feel free, visit our website. But in the Orenda app, in the Orenda calculator, there's something called the pH ceiling. It's right under pH and it's underlined. So you can tap that and learn more about what I'm about to tell you. That pH ceiling is going to tell you exactly where physics is going to take your pH. It has to, because you have carbon and alkalinity in your water, means your water's carbonated, just like a beer. A beer, if you open it, it's not going to stay frothy forever. It's going to go flat. Your pool is carbonated too, and it's going to go flat. And every time you add acid or inject CO2, you're recarbonating that beer, so to speak. You're recarbonating your pool, and it has to go flat again. And when it goes flat, on the way there, as you lose CO2, the pH rises up until the point where you go flat. That's
Hmm.
physics. It's called Henry's law. When it goes flat, you can't lose more CO2. Dalton, if you have a beer and it's already flat, if you swirl it around and shake it, can you make it flatter? No, it's already flat,
I
right?
was about to say, I was sitting there, I was like, I don't think you can.
No, I don't think so either. But if you and I open a beer at the exact same time and I swirl mine in a solo cup and you just let yours sit on the table, mine's going to go flat sooner than yours because I've introduced more turbulence. It's no different in a pool. Vanishing edges, spillways, bubblers, spray features, all of that stuff increases the loss of CO2. So does a salt cell. Salt cells have the same physics because they're off gassing hydrogen gas, which creates turbulence at a molecular level, which releases CO2 into the pool, which off gases. I could talk for hours and I don't want to. What I do want to say is if you don't understand what the alkalinity and the pH ceiling concepts are going to do, they're like gravity. You don't have to agree with this, but you still have to deal with it. I don't have to like gravity, but I still have to deal with it. Well, this is going to be just as guaranteed as gravity. If your pH gets too high because you have too high of a pH ceiling, because you're overcarbonated, meaning too much alkalinity, your chlorine, no matter how much you have, is going to break away from cyanuric acid no matter how much you have. So you could have 100 parts per million CYA and put 10 gallons of liquid chlorine in there. If your pH is too high, it breaks away and sunlight destroys it. So you're not going to be able to hold chlorine for a week. So it's those two things. We got to know the consumption of chlorine and we have to know the loss of chlorine thanks to largely physics and the separation of chlorine from cyanuric acid. I'm off my soapbox. Let's get back to this.
But I think it brings up, it kind of ties everything back, and that's to suggest that like understanding water chemistry is pivotal. And yes, for a homeowner, it makes sense. But if you're on the other side of this as a business owner working in retail service or even building pools, I think that there is a need for at least basic water chemistry knowledge to be able to sort of relay that to your homeowner. And I kind of wonder what you think about this because this has always been like my preconceived narrative of it. But I feel like if you're trying to explain water chemistry to a homeowner, making it more complicated is almost counterproductive. Am
Oh,
I sort of on the right path with this?
oh, you're absolutely right. And I don't know why traditional pool care is so complicated because what we should be focused on is the laws of physics that actually control water because you and I don't. Neither do your homeowners. Nobody does. Nature does. When we understand water, it's a lot easier to treat it without getting in its way. And I think that's really the fundamental difference between what we teach and everybody else. Well, maybe not everybody else, but certainly the norm. What I just said sounded very complicated. However, when you have the calculator on your phone and it does all the math for you, just trust the numbers. You don't have to understand the concept. It will work. Now, that's the difference. What we teach actually works. And so if you're learning pool chemistry from, a YouTube channel or this is my favorite, the printouts at a retail store, the printouts from the cashier when you get your water tested. Oh, alert, 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 exclamation points. That's not necessarily what's right for your pool. That's what the software says because it's based on ranges that water never read. So it's not to say that it's all bad. In summertime, if your water's 82 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer, maybe it's fine. But what if it's 60 degrees? Or what if you have very high cyanuric acid? Or what if it's a salt pool, not a regular pool like liquid chlorine or cal hypo? All of these things factor in. And if you're just looking at individual trees, you're going to miss the forest. And we don't want to. Water chemistry can be beautifully simple if you understand what water wanted to begin with, then just get out of the way. All you have to do is get leaves out, pine needles, and then disinfect. Chlorination's easy. Balancing
Mhm.
is harder.
So I want to sort of steer the conversation to this. Let's talk to those that have retail stores that they test water and
Mhm.
they sell chemicals, and you mentioned the retail handouts. In your advice, what would you tell those business owners that are looking to, okay, I want to maximize and be able to make my process more efficient in the retail setting? What are a couple things that, you need to kind of look out for and say, okay, you need to make sure you do X, Y, Z. What would be your advice there?
Well, in full transparency, we don't do well in retail stores with our brand, largely because you don't need a lot of our product, and we don't dilute our product down to sell more bottles, which means one bottle is going to last you, in many cases, a season or more. So you don't
Hmm.
really get the foot traffic coming back to the store. The other side of it is the chemistry software used is designed to adhere to the ranges because they're the standards, but also to get people back in the store. So my advice is think about, if you're a retail store owner, think about whether you have a service division of your own business or not. If you don't and you're 100% retail, well, okay, you're probably not going to want to hear what I have to say anyway. But if you do have a service business, your mindset's going to shift, because in order to be
Hmm.
profitable in that, you have to know what you're dealing with. If that's the pay dirt that you're dealing with, meaning water, well, don't you want to understand what you're actually treating? That's super important. If I'm a business owner, I want to know exactly what my employees are going out and dealing with so that I can standardize my product into the marketplace. Whether I have a new employee or a veteran, I want to deliver the same quality every single time. But back to, let's say a homeowner walks into the store. I want to sell chemicals that actually knock out the problem instead of just addressing a symptom that comes back 2 weeks later. And this is a problem with algicides, for instance.
Sure.
Algicides, most of them, after they get oxidized, which takes a ton of chlorine over several weeks, they leave behind, say, nitrates, which are food for more algae, and they introduce more complexity to the water. Whereas in our line, we don't have any chemical conflicts. So there's a reason we only have 5 products. You don't need a lot. You need to take things out of the water instead of putting more complexity into the water. So that's what I would say. I'd say focus on getting core problems out of the water and being on the proactive side. Get, symptoms are fine, but if you're addressing them, you're only band-aiding. You're not actually taking care of the problem. Get the complexity out. Get out the hydrocarbons, get the phosphates out, chlorinate as you should. Don't maximize CYA, keep it to a minimum. Those sorts of things are going to set up a massive advantage for you and your customers, so that when they do come back in the store, they're not just buying the same symptom stuff anymore. They're ready to upgrade to something better, maybe an automation system or a secondary disinfection system, which I think most pools should have one. But it's very hard to afford that if you're spending all your money on chemicals. So that's my opinion, of course, but I'm not in the business of telling anybody how to run theirs.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, we're just introducing a different line of thought. There's many
Mhm.
correct ways for there's not any incorrect way. I mean, obviously there
Oh, there are
is.
plenty of incorrect ways, but there
Yeah,
are
I mean,
several ways that do work. Yes.
I think about that, but there are multiple ways that do work. Let's go to the service side of things because I know Orenda is mainly geared toward the service side, and I feel like one thing that I see in my market, and honestly, I kind of practiced this when I was just starting out on the service side many moons ago. I used so many different brands for different problems because a
Hmm.
lot of it for me was price point. If I can use this this less cost to treat the problem, in my opinion, then I'm maximizing profitability. How important is it, from the manufacturer's side, looking at this problem, how important is it to keep things uniform, to where you're using a lot of the same recipes, so to speak, and ingredients?
Well, that's a great question. And as a manufacturer, of course, I have a bias, but this is the most objective way I can look at it. I'm less concerned about brands as I am chemical conflicts. So you can use 5 or 6 different companies. That's probably no problem as long as the active ingredients don't conflict with other products you're using. Perfect
Right.
example. There's a lot of sequestering agents out there. Most of them are phosphate based. Well, if you put a phosphate remover in, you're going to wipe out that sequestering agent.
Hmm.
So that's a conflict. You paid for both and you get a net zero, except you get fallout and more work and you have to clean your filter. So you
Sure.
paid twice for a pain. Why would you, like, why? Why'd you introduce that to begin with? There are alternatives. We make one
Right.
called SC1000, no phosphates. Now there's other consequences. There's other secondary things that happen, but as long as
Sure.
you know what they are, you can prepare. I'll give you a perfect example. In my pool, I actually just sold the house, but in my pool, if I had a metal problem and I wanted to remove metals, I would have used a sequestering agent, not my own product. I wouldn't have used my own product because that's not what my product's designed to do. It doesn't remove metals. I would have used a removal filter, and I either could have used my product with that filter or I would have used a sequestering agent, even though it's phosphate based, to handle the more urgent problem of the metals and then wipe out the phosphates a week or two later. That's appropriate proactive strategy because I know what I'm doing. I don't want to leave myself a mess that I have to clean up later. So it's not about brands, it's about active ingredients. And there are a
Hmm.
lot of brands out there that make good products.
You mentioned proactive, and I think that that's a great segue into next topic. I feel like a lot of this industry, a lot of the homeowners that we deal with, Eric, are reactive and not proactive. I feel like that has to be at one of the main forefronts of what we do. I know that a lot of our business is troubleshooting, but I feel like a good amount of the issues that arise are some are due to ignorance, and that is what it is. It's not easy per se to learn water chemistry, but a
Mhm.
lot of it is just pure negligence.
Yeah, some of it is. Well, listen, nobody knows what they don't know,
Yeah.
ourselves included. So ignorance, innocent ignorance is fine.
Yeah.
It's when you know something and you choose to shortcut it that it becomes a real problem.
Sure.
I will tell you this, being on the proactive side of things, because that is our philosophy, the customers that we've helped, I love this because every time I see them, they remind me of like it changed everything. Man, my
Hmm.
job is so much easier, or my company's a lot more profitable now. I don't have that same problem I kept calling you about, or whatever it is, because we can help just based on evidence and a chemistry understanding. We can help figure out what caused this persistent problem, for instance, of not holding chlorine for a week.
Sure.
Well, for one guy, it was he was introducing algicides that took an extensive amount of chlorine to get rid of, or sodium bromide, which is soon to be banned. But that took a ton of chlorine and they couldn't hold chlorine. Well, then you've
Right.
got on the other side of that, you've got people that are really responsible on those chemicals, but they have too much alkalinity. So their pH ceiling is too high. And they didn't realize that chlorine was breaking away from CYA and they were losing it because of that. And so
Right.
there's that sweet spot where you satisfy both ends of the root cause of a problem and the problem stops. It's amazing. It's like it's so easy to prevent calcium flakes in a saltwater pool that blow in through the return jets if you just understood why they were there instead of blaming the salt cell manufacturer for having a faulty product because they don't. It's not a faulty
Yeah.
product. It's a chemistry issue and it's
Indeed.
super easy to prevent.
One thing that I like to do, Eric, on every episode is have a mailbag question.
Oh, I love it. Let's hit it.
And this one, I mean, it's literally tailor made for this. Eric, what do you feel like is the biggest misconception surrounding water chemistry?
Oh, biggest. You're going to use superlatives like that? Man, biggest. There are a lot of them. I'll just pick the first thing that comes to mind. A lot of people think that pH can be controlled. Hell, we have technology out there called pH controllers. That's not true. That's a misnomer. You cannot control pH. NASA cannot control pH. pH is an equilibrium that moves with hydrogen ions, is always moving. Um, so trying to control it, like, okay, I want to set my pH to 7.4, for instance.
Sure.
How long do you think it stays there, Dalton?
Not long at all. I mean, it's
Not long.
like you
Exactly.
said at the beginning of this episode. I mean, you can't control it for 7 days. You definitely can't control it for more than a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to move and it's going to move based on turbulence because, again, it's physics. It's not how good you are as a pool pro or a pool owner. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with physics. And that's out of our control. But we can use those physics as long as we know what they are. I, for instance, understand gravity well enough to know that if I jump down 5 stairs, it's going to hurt. I don't have to be a physicist to know that. But I also know if I jump up, I'm going to hit the floor shortly thereafter, right?
Yeah.
So I can't explain physics from I'm sorry, I can't explain gravity other than we know what it is, right? I mean, it pulls you to
Yeah.
the earth. It's the mass of the earth or whatever, but we have to deal with it whether we like it or not. The
Sure.
pH is going to rise naturally in a pool that contains carbon and alkalinity. It has to. It's physics. And so you cannot control the pH. But here's the catch, Dalton. with the pH ceiling, if you know where the beer is going to go flat, if you know where the CO2 in the water is going to equalize with the CO2 in the air above the pool,
Mm-hmm.
you can contain the pH because that threshold you can choose. I'll give you a perfect example. Back to carbonated beers or carbonated drinks. I've got a beer in one hand and I've got champagne in the other. And let's pretend for the listeners out there that they are in an identical shaped bottle. Okay. I've got a bottle of champagne. I've got a bottle of beer. Can you visualize it?
I sure can.
Okay. Which one of those two bottles before you open it has more CO2 in it?
I'd probably say champagne.
Definitely champagne. Now, I don't know how much more CO2, but it's more. I mean, they have to wire down the cork and the drink is called bubbly. So when you
Sure.
open a beer, it goes, kss, and when you open champagne, it goes pop, right? And then, it usually flies out. So what you're going to witness is Henry's law. And Henry's law states that any gas dissolved in a liquid has to equalize with that same gas above the liquid. In this case, it's CO2. So that little pocket of air under the lid of beer is highly pressurized, but it's pressurized proportional to the pressure of CO2 in the drink. So when you open it, all of a sudden, the CO2 in that pocket of air and the drink have to equalize with the room, which is a much lower pressure. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to shake up the beer, or God forbid, the champagne, you're creating turbulence in that bottle, forcing more CO2 out, which makes the pressure in the air pocket higher than it normally would be. When you open it, that differential creates a vacuum and it pulls beer out. We think of this as beer exploding out of the bottle, but it's actually getting pulled out by the room. That's what's
Mm-hmm.
actually going on. Well, if we have these two bottles and I open them at the same time, one goes, one goes pop, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which one goes flat first?
I would say the champagne
Why?
because I guess the way it's being opened is that more of it's being pulled into the room. Is
Well,
kind
it's
of how you're
certainly
explaining
starting
it. That
that
would be
way.
my recommendation.
It certainly has a more violent start. It has a lot more to lose, but the answer is actually they go flat at the exact same moment, assuming they're
Okay.
not moved and the turbulence is the same and the temperature is the
Why is
same and the
that?
amount of liquid. The reason why is because Henry's law, and it
Mm-hmm.
starts with the equilibrium at the end of it. It basically, Henry's law works backwards from when it goes flat, but the pH of that champagne is going to go much higher when it goes flat, assuming it had alkalinity. We're referencing it to a pool.
Yeah, sure.
It may go flat, but if I make my height the pH, if I go pop, it goes pop flat. The pH of the champagne goes much higher because it had more to lose. It
Sure.
lost it faster, but over time it slows down, slows down, slows down, and eventually goes flat at the exact same rate. Now, I'm sorry, not the exact same rate, the exact same time.
Sure.
Well, we know this about pools. It's the exact same physics. There's no exceptions to this except putting an auto cover on the pool, which caps the beer, or
Mm-hmm.
putting an acid feeder, which continually recarbonates it, or a trichlor feeder, which continues to recarbonate it by dripping acid in. There's ways to interrupt physics, but there are not ways to break them. And that's what we need to remember. So the biggest misconception is that we can somehow control pH. At best, Dalton, we can suppress it. But trust me, that pH is going to get to its ceiling because water will always return to its natural state.
And
Always.
water is perhaps the strongest force on the planet. I mean, we've seen it, the oceans. I mean,
It's up there.
more things are different. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously not the best physicist out there.
Me neither. I'm
I'm a
terrible.
salesman of pools, but I wonder this, Eric, with all that we've talked about, and I really do appreciate you coming on here and just absolutely just spitting knowledge because I'm sitting here like I didn't even know this stuff, and I like to think that I know a lot of water
Well,
chemistry, and
listen,
that's
man, I've been making it up this whole time. Has it sounded convincing?
it has. Well,
Oh, good.
that's the way we need to. Yeah, you have me
Yeah.
convinced, but
Well, if your listeners want to have more than just a taste of the red pill and they want to go down the rabbit hole, the Rule Your Pool podcast is the one that we do,
yeah.
and we go in depth on all these subjects.
And I'm glad you went that. Orenda has a great just series, not only a podcast, but series of videos that kind of break it down. If you have one piece of advice that you would give those listening to this show, of all the knowledge that you've dropped, what
Mm.
would be the one thing that you want them to remember the most?
Mm. That's a good question. If
That's all I'm here for.
this is
I
the
don't
audience is
offer much more other than good questions.
well, you're doing a good job. Is the audience primarily homeowners or
It's gonna be
retailers
more
or what?
business owners, retailers, service leaders,
Respect
builders.
respect water. Do
Okay.
not try to impose your will upon it. It doesn't go very well. Don't try to beat it into submission. Do not try to beat it into unnatural positions because water doesn't care if it's clean or if it's green. It doesn't care if it's dirty. It doesn't care if it's muddy. Dalton, have you ever seen a disinfected pond or a disinfected lake?
Yeah.
Super clear. You have? I've never seen one. The crystal clear water that you do see is like 40 degrees or colder, but water will
Mm,
always return to its natural state. If you were to abandon a pool June 1st to July 1st, cut off circulation, cut off the power, no chemistry, that pool is going to look like a pond. And that's because water returns to its natural state, not necessarily what we want it to do. So, in order to get what we want, which is disinfection, which is unnatural to water, we have to give water what it wants, which is balance. And we can measure that
sure.
balance using the LSI. So, my advice to people is respect water, master the Orenda calculator. It's free. Get very familiar with balancing that LSI, and it will go well for you. If you don't, well, good luck because you're going to be fighting water instead of using it to your advantage.
A lot of great information. And I think like this has been just eye-opening for me, just because, like I said, that's the goal of this show. Let's learn something. As I say, every single episode, a rising tide raises all ships. I mean, there's a lot of competition in this industry, but there's a lot of opportunity for synergy and to bring each other up and to help each other up through different avenues. And this one's water chemistry. Eric Knight, one of the vice presidents at HAASA. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. That's going to wrap up this week's edition. Be sure to like the episode, the video, hit that subscribe button, share it to all your friends and everyone on whatever streaming service you utilize. That's going to wrap up today's show. We'll see you right back here
All right.
next week.
Thanks.